Two cuts of the same movie. Two different endings for the same hero. And a studio stuck in the middle, trying to decide which version of Supergirl was worth putting in front of the world. That's not a marketing tagline. That's what actually happened behind the scenes of one of the most expensive comic book movies of the year. I read through the new Hollywood Reporter breakdown of how Supergirl came together. And honestly, the drama behind the camera might be more interesting than anything that made it onto the screen. So let's get into it. If you're new here, this is the channel where we don't just tell you a movie flopped. We dig into the paperwork, the leaked test scores, the budget math, and the studio politics that explain why it flopped. Grab something to drink, because this one has layers. Quick context before we get into the mess. Supergirl is the second movie in what DC Studios is calling Chapter 1, subtitled Gods and Monsters. It follows last year's Superman reboot, which was directed by James Gunn and made around $618 million worldwide. That film was treated as proof that the new DC universe could actually work. Supergirl was supposed to be the second step in that plan. Millie Alcock plays Kara Zor-El, Superman's cousin, after a brief appearance in the first film. This time she gets her own story, a space adventure loosely inspired by the comic Woman of Tomorrow, where Kara teams up with a vengeance-driven alien girl named Ruthie and goes on a journey that's part road trip, part revenge quest. On paper, that's a solid pitch. In practice, something went wrong long before audiences ever saw a trailer. According to The Hollywood Reporter, once filming wrapped in May of last year, two different cuts of the movie were assembled. One from director Craig Gillespie, one from DC Studios itself. Gillespie is not a rookie. He directed Tanya, which earned Margot Robbie an Oscar nomination, and he also made Cruella for Disney. So this isn't a case of an inexperienced filmmaker losing control of a project. This is two experienced teams disagreeing on what the final film should actually be. The reporting says Gunn and Gillespie, quote, had creative differences over the direction of the movie, and that the film never found its footing in post-production. One insider even said the phrase, not creatively aligned, was the polite way of describing what happened. Other sources pushed back on that framing, saying it was closer to normal, healthy friction that happens on basically every big studio production. Whatever the exact temperature of that disagreement was, the result is not up for debate. Test scores for Supergirl reportedly never escaped the 60s, with one source claiming the ceiling might have been closer to 70. For context, that is a mediocre range for a summer tentpole. Studios generally want scores comfortably above that before they feel confident going into wide release. Once it became clear the film was in trouble, DC Studios reportedly took a heavier hand in post-production. They brought in Jeremy Slater, a writer known for his work on The Authority, to help patch things up. He wrote material for a 9-day reshoot window. The original screenwriter, Anna Noguera, stayed involved throughout, but one of the biggest sticking points was the climactic fight sequence, which had to be reworked more than once. Here's the part that stood out to me most. Gillespie's version of the film reportedly ran about 11 minutes longer, with more material involving a character named Krem of the Yellow Hills. When both cuts were tested against each other, scores actually dropped for both versions compared to earlier tests. The studio's cut narrowly won out over Gillespie's, but by only about 2 points. One insider said Gillespie's cut actually performed better on specific elements, like song choices, pacing, and the villain. The studio's cut won anyway, and that's the version that went to theaters. Read between the lines there for a second. When two competing cuts of a movie both test worse than expected, and the winning margin is basically a coin flip, that's not usually a sign of a project in a healthy place. That's a sign of a film that got picked apart in the edit bay, trying to find something that worked and never quite got there. Now let's talk about what actually happened once this movie hit theaters, because the box office story is even rougher than the internal drama. Supergirl was reportedly budgeted around $170 million, not including marketing. Marketing added roughly another $120 million on top of that, including a promotional partnership push across more than 80 brands, reportedly worth about $100 million in media value on its own. Add it up, and this movie needed to make somewhere between $300 and $400 million worldwide just to break even, depending on which analyst you ask. Opening weekend brought in 37 million domestically and 68 million worldwide. That is roughly a third of what Superman opened the year before. It landed behind Toy Story 5, which was still in its second weekend, and it only barely cleared the opening numbers of past DC disappointments like The Flash and Green Lantern. Critically, the film sits around 56% on Rotten Tomatoes, and audiences gave it a B- on CinemaScore. That's a soft grade for a superhero movie, a genre where audiences historically tend to be more forgiving than critics. Multiple outlets are now projecting the film could lose somewhere between $80 and $120 million once its theatrical run wraps up. To put that in perspective, that would put it in the same conversation as The Flash, which reportedly lost around $155 million, and Joker, Folie, Deux, which lost more than $140 million. Supergirl isn't quite the worst DC bomb on record, but it's firmly in that club. Here's where I want to slow down because it's easy to just point at the box office chart and say the movie bombed. The more interesting question is why. First, there's a positioning problem. Analysts have pointed out that following up your flagship Superman movie with his cousin, using the same powers and a similar visual identity, might not have been the strongest second move for a new universe. Compare that to how Marvel built its early slate around distinct, differentiated characters and tones. Second, there's a budget problem that the industry is only now openly talking about. Lesser-known characters, no matter how good the source comic is, may not be able to support $200 million price tags anymore. One box office analyst pointed to 2019's Joker as the model going forward, a movie that made over $1 billion globally on a budget of just $62 million. DC's own upcoming Clayface movie is reportedly being made for around $40 million, which suggests the studio may already be adjusting its strategy based on what just happened here. Third, and this is bigger than just Supergirl, superhero movies as a genre are pulling in noticeably less at the box office than they did before the pandemic. Some estimates put the yearly drop at around $3.5 billion compared to the peak years of 2017 through 2019. Female-led entries in particular, going back to Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel, haven't had a big theatrical win in a while, and Supergirl doesn't break that streak. That I don't want this to sound like a pile-on, because there is a genuine bright spot buried in all of this. Almost every review, positive or negative, agrees on one thing. Millie Alcock's performance is strong. Multiple critics have called her the best part of the movie, sometimes the only consistently good part. That's not nothing, especially for an actress stepping into a major franchise role for the first time. And DC Studios clearly agrees, because her future is already locked in. Alcock is set to reprise Kara in Gunn's next film, Man of Tomorrow, releasing in the summer of 2027, which is currently in production. Executive producer Lars Winter has also confirmed there's already a third project planned for the character down the line. So even if this specific film struggles to find its footing at the box office, the character and the actress playing her are not going anywhere. What we're really looking at here is a case study in how hard it is to build a shared universe in 2026. Superman proved the concept could work. Supergirl shows how fragile that momentum actually is, and how quickly a promising follow-up can turn into a cautionary tale about creative disagreements, rushed reshoots, and budgets that don't match audience appetite for a character. Whether DC course corrects with Clayface later this year, or leans harder into Man of Tomorrow next summer, this movie is going to be the example people point back to for a long time. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we go past the headline and actually look at the internal numbers and the reporting behind them, subscribe because there's a lot more of this universe left to unpack. I'll see you in the next one.